Welcome to Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Kinane, and we are broadcasting live on February 4th from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. Later on in the show, we're going to hear more details about Governor Ron DeSantis's proposed budget and find out what you think about it. But first, we're going to hear the latest about Florida scrub jays. So if you're interested in birds, in Florida nature, or in overdevelopment in the state, I hope you stay tuned throughout the program. Our guest is Elise Bennett with the Center for Biological Diversity. Welcome back to Tuesday Cafe, Elise.
It's great to be here, Sean.
Thanks so much for coming on. So we're going to talk about a lawsuit that you're in part of in just a moment. But let's start out with just talking about scrub jays. What do they look like and how do they live?
They are these beautiful, brilliant blue songbirds, and they're actually Florida's only endemic bird, which means that these birds are found nowhere else on Earth. They really are part of what makes Florida so special. If you've heard of a Florida scrub jay, you've probably heard about them because they're incredibly gregarious. They're inquisitive, they live in family groups, and when you take a hike through their territory, you'll see their little heads popping out of the scrub oaks watching you. They've been known to land on people's hats. And because of that gregarious nature, people come from far and wide to see our scrub jays.
And I read a little bit on audubon.org. So some of the things that they say there is that they breed in cooperative flocks, and each nestling territory is occupied by an adult pair and often by 1 to 6 helpers. And the pairs often the offspring from the previous years. And these additional birds help in defending the territory and feeding the young. So kind of interesting. And as far as the population goes, in the early 1990s, the total population was estimated at about 4,000 pairs. And that's probably a reduction of more than 90% from the original members, and loss of habitat has been the main problem. So tell us about where scrub jays live and what's happening to their habitat.
Well, that's exactly right. Florida scrub jays live in the same high, dry ground that humans like to build on. And their habitat is really unique and uniquely beautiful. They live in these scrub oaks, which are kind of low growing oak trees that grow right out of the beautiful, brilliant white sands that we find on the historic coastal ridges along Florida. And so they're beautiful places to visit. The scrub itself is actually quite endangered as well. And so you can see as the scrub becomes more and more endangered, so too does the scrub jay.
And about 10 years ago, Charlotte County, which is south of Sarasota, came up with a scrub jay habitat conservation plan. Why did they do that, and what does that plan do?
Well, because Florida scrub jays face extinction and because they're listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act, people aren't allowed to kill or capture or harass or harm them without a permit. And harm can include destroying areas of habitat that they use. And so rather than have each person in the county go through a permitting process one by one, which can have some regulatory uncertainty and for an individual could be a more overwhelming process, the county decided to come up with a habitat conservation plan and get a countywide permit for take of these Florida scrub jays. And that habitat conservation plan was created in 2013. And this concept is intended to benefit the scrub jay, but I think what also is really remarkable about it is it provides regulatory certainty to landowners. When they move into the area, they know or should know that this habitat conservation plan exists.
And the habitat conservation plan means that if a developer, if a landowner wants to develop land that's in the scrub, they have to pay a fee. So tell us about that fee and what it would be used for once it's collected.
That's right. The habitat conservation plan requires a fee as well as, in some circumstances, additional on-site mitigation or basically protecting habitat on the site where development is occurring. And the fee itself is intended to actually go towards the county acquiring other areas of habitat to protect them in perpetuity, as well as to manage the habitat, because these habitats actually require well, what would be natural management by lightning caused fires, they can actually be maintained by prescribed fires. So people will go out and actually burn these sites to keep them healthy.
So the fees and the other rules that were part of Charlotte County's habitat conservation plan for the scrub jays, well, that ruffled the feathers of a group called the Pacific Legal Foundation. What do we know about them?
Well, we know that they consider themselves to be a private property rights group. And so that's the gist of the kinds of cases that PLF brings. And in this particular scenario, it's the similar kind of case we might expect. It's a landowner that moved into the county, bought a piece of property that was subject to this conservation plan, and now objects to these fees.
And so they filed a lawsuit last year in response to the Charlotte Plan, and they want to remove Endangered Species Act protections from the scrub jay and do away with this habitat conservation plan.
That's right. Among other things, this case alleges that the county's program is unconstitutional. And they're arguing that protecting a species that's found in only one state goes beyond Congress's authority under the Constitution. And that's a really concerning argument, but it's also an argument that has been shot down in courts time and time again. And so the reason that we moved to intervene in this case is to make that very point.
So you can imagine that if this does succeed, that essentially it would put the Endangered Species Act really under the microscope if this one case succeeds.
Right. Well, nearly a third of all endangered species live in only one state. And that's either because they've already been extirpated in the other states where they lived because of harms that humans have caused, or because they require really specific and narrow habitat, like the Florida scrub jay. And the Endangered Species Act is designed, and Congress intended it to protect all of America's species and all of the biodiversity we rely on for our own health and well being as well. As I mentioned, the landowner's argument has lost in courts across the country, and if it were to succeed here, it would strip protections not only from the scrub jay, but also other iconic endemic species like the Florida panther, the key deer, or the Florida bonneted bat, which may be other species people are familiar with here.
So what was it in those court cases? What did those courts say that the arguments that they agreed with the arguments of environmental groups, let's say, that were defending the Endangered Species Act from this claim that Congress can't make laws that protect species that only live in one state?
Right. The overarching gist of it is simply that the protection of endangered species does have a substantial effect on our interstate commerce. This argument is raised under the Commerce Clause. And so, for that reason, because of this significant national interest, the law could stand.
So that brings us to your action last week. You're part of a coalition of groups intervening in the lawsuit. So, what are the groups and what are your arguments?
So we have joined the Florida Wildlife Federation and others, and we are represented by Earth Justice. And we've moved to intervene in this case and we've intervened on the side of the government to help uphold these laws that protect scrub jays and that protect so many other species.
So, what would be the next step? Would it go to trial? Do you know what would happen next?
Well, we've asked for the court's permission to intervene in the case, and so now it's up to the court to rule on our proposed intervener's request. After that happens, the case will move forward like any other. At this phase, we have a complaint and an answer, and the facts will be developed, and ultimately, the court will make a decision of law based on this complaint that was filed.
Well, we'll continue to follow that lawsuit, of course. And the next question I have doesn't deal directly with the lawsuit, but since we're on the subject of scrub jays, I want to bring up the Florida state bird. It's the mockingbird in Florida, but every year there's talk of replacing the mockingbird or adding some other categories of state bird. And every year the scrub jay comes up. Do you have any thoughts on this whole debate?
I think it would be a wonderful thing to have the Florida scrub jay named as our state bird. Because it's our only endemic bird, it truly is an icon of our state. It's something that no other state has. Several other states actually have the mockingbird as their state bird. And so I've been supportive of this for years. And in fact, there's a group of students who have been working for over a decade now under one teacher who have been trying to get a bill passed to do this. And I see that this year around, there's a new proposal to have the flamingo listed as the state bird and the Florida scrub jay as the state songbird, which seems like maybe perhaps a win-win for flamingo and scrub jay lovers across the state.
So we can change gears just a tiny bit right now. The Department of Interior announced in December that it will nominate the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge to join UNESCO World Heritage List. And the Center for Biological Diversity is among several groups that have pushed for this recognition. So tell us about the Okefenokee Swamp and why you think that UNESCO recognition would help it.
The Okefenokee Swamp is like no other place on Earth. It is just bursting with life. I try to visit it at least once a year. And it's got creatures from the gargantuan dinosaur like alligator snapping turtle to the beautiful barred owls whose calls echo off the cypress. So many species of frogs. They believe more than 1,000 species of moths. It's incredibly biodiverse. And it's also the largest blackwater wetland ecosystem in North America. And unlike other World Heritage sites like the Everglades, which have been significantly disturbed by human activities and drained in parts, the Okefenokee is largely intact, which is pretty unique in this day and age. And so the refuge itself, as well as nonprofit supporters and individuals from the communities, have supported this World Heritage designation, which is a UNESCO designation that recognizes sites that have outstanding universal value. That's the term they use. And I think it's particularly applicable to the Okefenokee Swamp. Um, and so the swamp has waited for decades now to be nominated, and recently finally had the nomination submitted to UNESCO for consideration, which is an incredibly exciting and landmark moment for the refuge.
And you mentioned that Okefenokee is a blackwater ecosystem. What does that mean, and compare that with other ecosystems we know about?
So Blackwater wetlands have water that almost looks like tea or soda. It's kind of brown. If you stick your hand in the water, it makes you look almost bronze under the water. And that's because of tannins that come out of the cypress that grow out of the swamp. There's actually other waters that are tannic like that in Florida. So folks might be familiar with what Blackwater swamps waters look like. But what's also really unique about Okefenokee is that it is underlain by this incredibly thick layer of peat, which is decayed vegetation that has just layered itself over the years. And the name Okefenokee is actually believed to come from a Native American word that means land of the trembling earth. And it's given that name because these areas of peat will actually shake loose from the bottom and burst up through the water. An incredible experience, I bet, and one that I have yet to see for myself. But that is what in part makes the Okefenokee unique as a wetland.
What are some other things that the Center for Biological Diversity is working on that our audience should know about?
Well, another really interesting update about the Okefenokee is that the refuge is also currently looking to expand its acquisition boundary. So World Heritage designation itself doesn't confer any protections or legal restrictions. It's more an honor, an international honor for a site. But the refuge is starting to recognize that there are lands beyond the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge that are critical to its integrity. And that's this area called Trail Ridge along the eastern side of the swamp, which basically acts as the rim of a bowl. And there's concerns that there have been proposed mining over the years that would basically punch holes into that wall. And this is sort of a broad way to explain it, but could potentially drain parts of the swamp. And so the refuge is also moving to expand its acquisition boundary, which means it would give the refuge the opportunity to purchase land from willing sellers and help to further bolster protections around the refuge. And that's another really well-considered plan that we've been supporting because we know if we can protect Okefenokee, we can protect dozens of imperiled and endangered species that are so important to us.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on Tuesday Cafe today, Elise.
It was great to see you, Sean. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. Elise Bennett is with the Center for Biological Diversity. They're part of a lawsuit that's aimed at keeping habitat protections for the Florida scrub jay.